Sensational news. Ukraine has cracked the Belarusian code. Fedorov go all out. Secret sites that controlled Shaheds targeting Kyiv have been eliminated. The victory algorithm. A new minister, a new system, a diplomatic strike, and a technological victory. Belarusian sites that threaten the country have been identified and deactivated. Absolute security for the capital and central regions. One strike from Fedorov and Belarus is falling apart at the seams. This has never happened before. Don't miss all the details coming up right now. Hello, you are watching Ukraine Today. I'm Salome Adol, bringing you the latest events. Ukraine is officially betting on an alternative Belarus. Volodymyr Zelensky is changing the rules of the game. Kyiv is no longer ignoring the Belarusian issue, and this could become a strategic turning point for the entire region. The resumption of active communication with Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is not just a diplomatic gesture, it's a clear signal. Ukraine is betting on a democratic Belarus.
As for our recent relations with Belarus, there has indeed been a certain turning point. Previously, we tried not to notice the existence of this state, only occasionally commenting on Lukashenko's strange statements. Now the situation has changed, which has led to renewed communication with Tsikhanouskaya, who represents the opposition, is in exile, and generally has ambitions to lead Belarus in the event of future democratic elections. This cooperation is necessary, and in this way Ukraine demonstrates that it remembers everything perfectly well, remembers the events of 2022, and will not forgive anyone for anything. That is why we are building cooperation specifically with those representatives of Belarus who are in fact part of the democratic world. Counting, of course, in the future on a change of power in this neighboring country.
Candidate for a PhD in public administration and expert in public policy, Ilyak Kotov emphasized, this indicates Kyiv's final refusal to ignore the Belarusian direction. And moreover, about formulating a new strategy.
We emphasize that we do not recognize Lukashenko. In fact, not as a president, not as the leader of this country, but we perceive him similarly to Putin, just as a dictator who has held on to power for a very, very long time. That is why this needs to be done because, well, let's be honest. Belarus took its position back in 2022, and in fact, as of now, it hasn't changed. Maybe they're no longer flying into our territory. Missiles from Belarusian territory, but still, they are helping the Russians in every possible way. So there's absolutely no point in turning a blind eye to this.
And now concrete steps. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine is already preparing a candidate for the new position of Special Envoy on Belarusian affairs. And this is a key point. Ukraine needs a representative who deeply understands the Belarusian context, knows the political processes, and can promote a democratic agenda in relations with Belarusian society. Essentially, this is about creating an alternative channel of communication, not with the regime, but with the future of Belarus. After years of caution and hesitation, Kyiv is clearly showing that the Belarusian direction will no longer be a gray area in Ukrainian diplomacy. And now there is only one question. Will this step become the beginning of a new regional reality? And while Kyiv is making a diplomatic bet on democratic Belarus and strengthening communication with Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, a completely different, quiet technological war is unfolding in the north. Ukraine has dismantled a network that was helping Shaheds enter from Belarusian territory. Mykhailo Fedorov announced this during a meeting with journalists.
We managed to eliminate an entire network that was being used by Shaheds in the north. This had a positive impact on the defense capability of Kyiv and the central part of Ukraine.
This refers to a modern communication system that allowed Russian kamikaze drones to coordinate with each other during attacks from the direction of Belarus. And these details were revealed by an advisor to the Minister of Defense.
But this network, in which many Shaheds operate, needs to be simultaneously connected to the control system, to the Russian operators who manage the process. And such control points exist on the territory of Russia and used to be on the territory of Belarus. What does this look like? It's just an ordinary mobile operator tower, or some other structure about 70 to 80 meters high, equipped with powerful antennas pointed toward Ukraine. In other words, these are nodal points through which information from the Shaheds is transmitted to the control center.
In fact, this means one thing. Part of the infrastructure used for attacks on Kyiv and central Ukraine was connected to Belarusian territory. And this is where politics and security converge at a single point. On the one hand, there is a diplomatic bet on a future democratic Belarus, and on the other, the elimination of real technical nodes through which the enemy launched deadly drones. And after Mykhailo Fedorov's statement about the destruction of the Shahed guidance network, the main question arose. How exactly did this scheme work, and why is Belarus involved here? The answer to this was given by the advisor to the Minister of Defense on his Telegram channel.
The radio network on the Shaheds is essentially radio modems that not only receive and transmit signals but also act as repeaters and signal amplifiers for each other. With this setup, all the Shaheds in the air are connected to each other by radio. As a result, you can shoot down several Shaheds and the connection won't be lost. It will simply be rerouted through the other Shaheds.
In fact, all the Shaheds in the air are interconnected by radio. And even if several drones are shot down, the connection won't be lost. It will simply be rerouted through other devices in the network. But the key question is, where does this signal originate?
Of course, such points. It is advantageous to place them on tall masts from 70 to 90 meters high, somewhere near our border, and to use powerful antennas directed toward Ukraine. Such high communication points on enemy territory emit radio signals that our radio intelligence can detect from our side. We can triangulate the signal and say with 100% certainty that it is coming from a specific location. Yes, exactly. The fact that such points were operating from Russian territory and the occupied territories surprised no one. But the operation of such points from Belarusian territory turned out to be a surprise.
According to him, there were several such points in Russia. They serviced Shaheds in different parts of Ukraine. One of them was able to transmit a signal all the way to Kyiv, and reconnaissance UAVs flying over the capital used it to transmit data. Another one supported attacks on western Ukraine, particularly targeting the railway direction, Kyiv-Kovel. And here's the key phrase.
Of course, we did not just stand by and watch this process in silence. Control of Shaheds from the territory of Belarus. And
now we are talking about the actual neutralization of the technical infrastructure that was helping the enemy attack Kyiv and the regions. Meanwhile, the Lukashenko regime is faltering, Kyiv is demonstrating resolve, and the Belarusian opposition is making itself heard again. The high-profile moment with the dictator's handshake. It is already being actively discussed live on air. This episode has become symbolic. Is Belarus getting closer to freeing itself from Russian influence? Against the backdrop of events where predictions about Moldova and Georgia are being voiced more frequently, clear signals are also being sent toward the Kremlin. Is Putin really losing room to maneuver? Ukraine is declaring its leadership in the region. The first details are coming up. While Russia is trying to hold the front in Ukraine, the very geography of the war is beginning to change. Kyiv is becoming increasingly active in areas where, until recently, Moscow's influence was considered unshakable: Belarus, Transnistria, and Georgia.
Minimizing the influence of the Russian Federation within its borders is a security priority, not only for Ukraine, but for the entire civilized world, and above all, for the European continent. That is why the goals of Ukraine, Europe, and the West as a whole are not absolutely identical, not the same.
Belarus is getting increasingly drawn into the war. It is from its territory that Russia launches drones at Ukrainian cities. At the same time, according to Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine has already destroyed facilities that provided control over these drones.
Modern relays for Shahed drones have appeared on the territory of Belarus. According to him, these are used for targeting and coordinating strikes on Ukraine.
But that's not all, because the dictators of these countries have signed a number of documents within the so-called Union State. Thus, Russia is slowly but surely absorbing Belarus.
The current international situations are unfolding against a backdrop of tension, especially on the western borders. It is vital for us to develop allied relations and strategic partnership between Belarus and Russia.
At the same time, resistance to Lukashenko's regime persists within Belarus itself. Holding new elections, constitutional reform, supporting Ukraine, and pursuing a European path of development. All of these are goals of the Belarusian opposition.
Analyzing the capabilities of the Belarusian opposition, as well as those of the Russian side. Both the first and the second are puppet-like, artificial, they seem to exist, but in the totalitarian regimes of Lukashenko and Putin, without a doubt, they simply imitate some kind of activity there.
A month ago, for the first time since 2020, a bilateral meeting took place between Volodymyr Zelensky and the leader of the Belarusian opposition, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. So what could this mean?
This is a very positive development. After Tsikhanouskaya's recent comments and following this direct line of communication with the president of Ukraine, a significant and productive form of horizontal contact was finally established with the special services. Ukraine, which began to actively, on a regular basis rather than a one-off, communicate with representatives of the Belarusian opposition in order once again to understand and gauge the mood within Belarus itself.
Another potential point of change remains Transnistria. Weakened by economic and energy crises, the region has, for the first time in many years, found itself in the spotlight of Kyiv and its European allies.
For example, with the military, troops, gas, electricity, Russia cannot help them with any of this right now. Of course, this causes negative sentiment, specifically Transnistria. Undoubtedly, many people are starting to become seriously disillusioned with Putin's policies and the Russian Federation. Now, there is even a serious opinion circulating in Transnistria that Putin has simply abandoned them.
At the same time, the European Union has issued an ultimatum to the Kremlin.
Russia has occupied many territories and its troops are deployed in various regions, in particular in Georgia and Moldova. Therefore, yes, in order to achieve lasting peace, it must be clearly understood. They must withdraw their troops from all the occupied territories where they are currently stationed. Of course, some say that such demands are unrealistic, but let's be honest, the demands from Russia are generally unrealistic.
European initiatives are increasingly calling not only for the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine, but also from Transnistria and even Georgia. In fact, this is about forming a new security system.
The configuration for such an eye-opening for the residents of Transnistria about the reality is now as close as possible.
However, if in Transnistria Russia is if it is practically isolated there, in Georgia it retains powerful direct military levers of influence in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, while at the same time keeping the rest of the country in a state of high economic dependence.
The influence that the Russian Federation exerts within Georgia is no longer the same as it once was. It is definitely not as significant as it was in the past, especially during those times when such large-scale and global news developments were frequently occurring. Economic and logistical projects with major players had not yet been implemented. Now Georgia could become something that, let's say, looks like a neutral zone. And
of course, the people of Georgia themselves are not satisfied with this.
I'm here for a very simple reason, to defend my European future and democracy in my country. We participated in the elections and they were clearly rigged. And so far, we've done everything we could to show that we want a European future. We
do not want to be part of Russia, we want to be part of Europe, and we belong to Europe.
The war is not only being fought on the battlefield. Today, the confrontation between Russia and the West is becoming increasingly evident beyond the borders of Ukraine as well. Ukraine, where the future security of the entire region is being decided. Lukashenko urgently convenes his generals. Minsk and Moscow are preparing decisions. In Belarus, there is talk of possible mobilization, and the actions of the regime are raising more and more questions. Is the next step being prepared in coordination with the Kremlin? Ukrainian military make it clear that any threats will not go unanswered. Events are unfolding rapidly, Lukashenko's statements are shocking society, and experts are talking about serious risks for the region and relations with NATO. Will Putin be able to continue supporting Minsk? More on this in the following report. A new attack? Russia and Belarus are preparing new joint exercises on the territory of Belarus. Volodymyr Zelensky said this in an interview with an independent Belarusian publication. He said that Ukraine is monitoring this and assessing how large these exercises will be.
I know that Lukashenko and Putin, are talking about joint military exercises on the territory of Belarus. We will see how much larger they actually turn out to be. The last time they were massive, as you remember, an offensive against Ukraine began. So all of this poses significant risks for Ukraine, that's for sure. And I believe there are significant risks for Belarusians as well.
Experts are also saying that the number of troops needs to be studied very carefully. And based on this analysis, we can assess how great the threat is and what the plans are.
of the grand fortified and historic Moscow Kremlin complex. to reach the level of preparation for a 40,000 strong group. No, there is also no standard staffing. In order to attempt another invasion of Ukraine with the goal of reaching Kyiv, the Russian group would need to be 100,000 to 150,000 strong, and it is simply impossible to deploy such a force on Belarusian territory without being noticed. And this would mainly be a group consisting of human resources. Therefore, these threats can be... What?
Interestingly, according to experts, Ukraine will no longer hold itself back in the event of a threat. That is, if Russia stages provocations on the territory of Belarus, then the strikes by the armed forces of Ukraine will also be on
the sovereign territory of the Republic of Belarus, which is a landlocked nation situated in the heart of Eastern Europe, is characterized by its vast plains, dense forest regions, and numerous scenic waterways that define its unique geographical landscape. There will be absolutely no degree of tolerance whatsoever shown toward the continued physical and territorial presence of Russians on the territory of Belarus, and their concentrated deployment will be systematically targeted and engaged with all the various means we have available.
Is one of the factors that military exercises are being prepared on the territory of Belarus. Mass conscription notices are being issued to men both in Russia and in Belarus. And in Belarus, everyone is being taken to Grodno and other cities in the west. And this is important. The Grodno region is adjacent to the Suwałki corridor, a strategic area between Belarus and Kaliningrad. They are being taken quickly, sometimes without even having time to gather their things at home. Sometimes they are taken straight from work, as women say. Officially, the authorities say this is a test of combat readiness and a response to the West's aggressive rhetoric. Therefore, such exercises are not only a threat to Ukraine. An attack on NATO is no longer something unrealistic. After all, Putin has already carried out hybrid attacks in Europe, and NATO countries are already preparing for combat. Moreover, it has become known that Belarus and Russia have involved Hamas fighters in building tunnels to Poland. The official version is that these tunnels are for smuggling illegal migrants into Europe as part of a hybrid war against the West. However, experts do not rule out the possibility of sending sabotage groups through them.
Imagine that these tunnels could be used for interference. Is it truly the case that Ukraine is now fully prepared for the next steps?
To defend itself against another Russian invasion from Belarus? Yes, but is NATO ready for a war with Russia?
NATO is absolutely not ready for a war with an adversary like Russia. Currently, there is absolutely not a single country anywhere in Europe that possesses full 100% or even sufficient partial readiness for what could potentially await it. In the dire event of a comprehensive, full-scale and all-out military offensive operation that Russia might choose to launch against any one of the various member states of the North Atlantic Alliance or the broader European Union.
That is why negotiating with Russia is pointless, fearing to provoke Putin, as most Western politicians are doing now. Putin understands only strength, and if he is not stopped in time, war in Europe could begin as early as this year. Right now, is a new stage of confrontation beginning? Poland is strengthening its border and effectively isolating Belarus and Russia from the European space. Alarming signals are sounding, he says, about emergency measures and mobilization scenarios. Tensions are rising by the hour, and the Kremlin, as before, is trying to act through others. Is the region entering a dangerous phase of escalation? Who will make the decisive move first, and what will it lead to? All the details ahead. Poland makes a loud statement and strengthens its border. And in western Belarus, reservists are being urgently called up. Coincidence?
Only rely on yourself. You shouldn't count on anyone else. I'm telling you for the 5th time, we have no friends in the world. None.
Men in Belarus have started receiving draft notices en masse. They are taken the same day with no time to pack. And their phones are confiscated as well. So, as relatives report, contact with those drafted disappears immediately.
Of course, I would be worried about this. The main difference is that this hasn't happened before. And in fact, Belarusian factories are in an uproar because this has never happened before. And people are asking each other, say, from different regions, is this happening where you are? Do you have this too? So the first question everyone asks each other is whether this is happening all over Belarus right now, or if it's still isolated to just a few regions of the country.
Officially, of course, they call it a combat readiness check. No mobilization whatsoever. But in Russia, it all started the same way, with assemblies and...
The team will conduct a series of extremely thorough and comprehensive on-site inspections, carefully evaluating every single detail of the facility to ensure that all safety standards and operational protocols are being strictly followed without any exceptions or oversights during the entire evaluation process. Maximum information blackout. And there is one point that should especially concern us because we really don't understand what will happen next today.
What's interesting is that the call-up of reservists is happening specifically in the western regions of the country, that is near Poland. There's also a strategically vulnerable area of Europe there, Suwałki corridor, too many coincidences in one spot.
A narrow section between the Kaliningrad region and Russia. In part, the settlement of Suwałki is located near the border of Poland and Lithuania. The width there, I think, is about 40 kilometers, so it's really quite small. As a direct consequence of this situation, if you strategically concentrate a significant and powerful array of military forces there, you can achieve a successful breakthrough in a relatively short amount of time. Excuse me, a land corridor to the Kaliningrad region.
At the same time, Poland announced a 48-hour deadline. That's exactly how much time they need to completely mine the border with Belarus and Russia.
Today, on February 20th, the country withdrew from the Ottawa Convention and now has the full right to mine its borders.
But could the Belarusian maneuvers be connected to Poland's own actions?
Even though, for now, we are only seeing hybrid attacks, that doesn't mean a real fully fledged attack couldn't happen tomorrow. That's why, of course, I would consider this mobilization story as a real threat, as a genuine threat of a possible attack. And accordingly, since it takes more than 48 hours to lay mines, it's time to start mining now.
He also ordered a large-scale inspection of the combat readiness of the armed forces. Military units were practicing everything to the fullest extent.
We're not doing this for a grade, we're doing it to be ready, to defend our country, to protect our national interests, our sovereignty, our republic, Belarus.
And now reservists are being urgently called up. So maybe this is just part of Lukashenko's inspection?
It's unclear. In my opinion, it looks like a signal around the corner, but we shouldn't perceive it only as a signal. I believe we should see this as a concrete military threat.
But here Moscow appears again. Well, how could it be without her? The almost total influence of the Kremlin makes Belarus not just an ally, but a real staging ground for provocations against NATO.
Frankly speaking, these are almost wartime conditions.
It's enough to recall just the statements about the Areshnik on the territory of Belarus.
In addition, the first positions equipped with the Areshnik missile system. We have had this equipment with us since yesterday, and it is now on active combat duty.
Or the information that Russia is using Belarusian territory to attack Ukraine and put pressure on European countries.
Operators of Russian Shahed drones, they operate against Ukraine, including from the territory of Belarus. The coordination for strikes is maintained from Belarusian territory. Russia uses Belarus as a testing ground for blackmailing Europe and the world.
However, officials in Minsk have stated that they do not intend to go to war with Western countries. But it's unlikely that one Kremlin dictator will listen to another, the potato one.
As for getting dragged into the war, I have my doubts. Because, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. These decisions are made by Lukashenko himself, and for now, he wants to keep his freedom to maneuver, including for some of his potential dealings with Trump. Some puffing up, some show of bravado, some attempt to create the impression that, of course, Lukashenko will do as told, but you can't say he's completely under Putin's control. That's not the case. But that doesn't prevent him from really carrying out and preparing provocations.
Lithuania is closely monitoring developments in the Republic and states that there is no reason to panic at this time. But Russia clearly has its own plans regarding Belarus. Constant probing of NATO's borders and testing the reactions of neighboring countries is a systematic strategy and a test of the alliance's patience. Well, that's all I have for now. And what do you think about these latest events? We look forward to your comments. There is more to come. Stay informed about the main news and don't forget to give us a like. Wishing you peaceful skies above.